When I first moved into the apartment on West Haverford, I told myself it was exactly what I needed. A place stripped of sentiment, stripped of memory, stripped of her. After my divorce, I wanted anonymity. I wanted a roof that wasn't heavy with history. The building wasn't much. Peeling paint, flickering lights, the faint smell of mildew that clung to the stairwell like a wet rag. But it was cheap, and I was desperate. The landlord, a gruff man in his 60s named Ed, handed me the keys without ceremony. "Quiet place," he said. "Neighbors keep to themselves. That's what you wanted, right?" "Yeah," I muttered. "Quiet's fine." The first night I unpacked a few boxes, drank too much whiskey, and collapsed on the mattress I'd dragged in. At 2 in the morning I woke to a sound I couldn't place. At first I thought it was the pipes clanging, or someone arguing through thin walls. But then I heard it again. Muffled screaming. Not just yelling. Panic. Pleading. A woman's voice rising and falling like she was trapped on the other side of the wall. I froze. Heart pounding. Divorce had left me jumpy, raw. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. I sat there, ears straining, until I convinced myself it was a dream. The next night it came again, same time. Screams, then hurried footsteps, then silence so sharp it made my teeth ache. I called the police. 2 officers knocked on the door next to mine, listened, then shrugged. "Place is empty," one said. "Hasn't been rented in years." "That's impossible," I said. "I heard someone in there." They exchanged a look. "Sir, maybe you should get some rest." I didn't sleep after that. By day, the apartment seemed normal enough. I'd make coffee, stare at the blank walls, and tell myself I was imagining things. I was 43, alone, and still paying alimony I could barely afford. Stress could explain a lot. But at night, when the screams returned, I pressed my ear against the wall and felt my stomach twist. It wasn't imagination. Something was happening in there. I started recording the sounds on my phone. The first few nights, the audio was faint, almost useless. But by the 5th night, the microphone caught it clear. Pounding fists, a cry for help, the voice breaking into sobs. I played it back again and again, hands shaking. Proof. Finally. The next morning, I went to Ed. "You told me that apartment was empty," I said, shoving my phone toward him. He didn't even listen, just waved me off. "Sir, I'm not entertaining ghost stories. That unit's been boarded up since '09. If you don't like it here, you can leave, but don't bother me with this again." Ghost stories. I wanted to argue, but his eyes had already moved past me. I walked back to my apartment, recorder still in my hand, and thought about how easy it was to dismiss someone. How easy it had been for my ex-wife to dismiss me, too. That night, when the screams came again, I sat on the edge of my bed and whispered through the wall, "I hear you." By the 2nd week, the apartment was swallowing me whole. I stopped going into the office except when I absolutely had to. My boss left curt voicemails. "Carlos, deadlines don't wait for personal issues." My coworkers whispered in the hallways when I did show up, eyes darting away when I looked. The sleeplessness was etched into my face. The noise came every night, always close to 2 in the morning. Sometimes it was footsteps racing across the wooden floor, sometimes pounding fists, sometimes screams so sharp I wanted to tear the drywall down with my hands. I started knocking on the neighbor's door, first politely, then louder. "I know you're in there," I shouted. "Say something." Silence. One afternoon, when the sun slanted across the hallway, I swore I saw something. A faint, bloody handprint smeared across the doorframe. I blinked, and it was gone. I told myself it was stress, that my mind was inventing things, but a deeper fear curled inside me. What if it wasn't the building? What if it was me? My ex-wife's lawyer called that same week. "Mr. Hicks, you're 2 months behind on alimony. This can't continue." I almost laughed. My ex took everything and still wanted more. I slammed the phone down and paced the apartment, chest tight. That night, I hit record again. The screams came, louder than ever, a woman sobbing, begging, then pounding. I gripped the recorder like it was a lifeline. When the noise stopped, I sat in silence, shaking, staring at the wall. In the morning, I went back to Ed's office. "Listen to this," I demanded, pressing play. He didn't even flinch. "You think you're the first tenant who's heard things in this building?" he said flatly. "Old pipes, rats, buildings make noise." "This isn't rats," I snapped. "This is a woman screaming for her life." "Get some sleep, Hicks." He shut the door in my face. Sleep. That was the one thing I couldn't do. I started drinking more, whiskey blurring the edges of my fear, but the noise always came back, slicing through the haze. One night, I saw a shadow stretch beneath the neighbor's door. Long, too long, spilling across the hallway like a stain. I stumbled back into my apartment, slammed the door, and pressed my back against it, shaking. I wasn't crazy. I couldn't be. The night I broke in, it wasn't planned. Not really. The screams had been relentless, each one slamming against my skull until I felt like the walls themselves were vibrating. I grabbed the crowbar I kept by the bed, left over from my construction days, and stormed into the hallway. The lock on the neighbor's door was rusty, brittle. It gave way with a sharp crack. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with mold. The floorboards creaked under my weight. Bare walls, no furniture, no signs of life. Just rot and silence. I laughed, a broken sound. Maybe I was insane after all. Maybe the divorce, the stress, the loneliness had chewed through my sanity. Then I remembered the recorder in my pocket. I pressed play. The voice that spilled out made my knees buckle. "Carlos, please stop. Don't do this." My ex-wife. Her voice clear as day, begging. I stumbled against the wall, bile rising in my throat. I hadn't heard that voice in years, not like that. Not with terror in it. Memories clawed up from the dark, her eyes wide with fear. My hand raised. The night she left. The fight that ended everything. I'd buried it deep, told myself it was just anger, just words. But now, hearing her voice, I wasn't sure anymore. The walls weren't haunted. The building wasn't cursed. It was me. I stopped recording after that night. I didn't need proof anymore. The proof was already inside me. Still, the screams came. Not just at 2 a.m. anymore. Sometimes at dusk, sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, seeping through the walls like the building itself wanted to remind me. I quit my job. Couldn't face the stares, the whispers. My world shrank to 4 mold-stained walls, a bottle of whiskey, and the voice that wouldn't stop. "Carlos, please stop." Sometimes I shouted back, "I didn't mean to." Other times I pressed my forehead to the wall and whispered, "I'm sorry." But the voice never answered, only screamed, only begged. Neighbors started avoiding me in the hallway. I caught one woman whispering to another, "That's the guy from 3C, stares at walls, talks to himself." I wanted to tell them the truth, but what truth was there? That the building was replaying my sins? That I'd buried something so deep even I couldn't face it until now? One night I woke to find the handprints again, this time not faint. This time smeared across my own walls, red and dripping, vanishing when I blinked, but leaving the smell of iron in the air. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. I wasn't sure if I was seeing ghosts or just my guilt rotting me from the inside out. But I knew this. There was no escape. The last straw came when I found the crowbar leaning against my bed, streaked with something dark. I hadn't touched it since that night, but there it was, heavy and accusing. I tried scrubbing it clean. The stain didn't fade. I staggered to the neighbor's door, pressed my palms flat against it and whispered, "What do you want from me?" The silence answered with a scream so loud it rattled my teeth. My own scream echoed back at me, twisted into hers. I ran back inside, tore open the bottle, drank until the world spun. But the voice didn't fade. It grew louder, clearer. "Carlos, please stop." I smashed the recorder against the wall, but the sound kept playing in my head. I realized then the truth I'd been running from. The apartment wasn't cursed. The neighbor wasn't real. The voice wasn't a ghost. It was memory. My own crime clawing its way back. The door next to mine had never been locked from the outside. It had been locked from within, by me. Now the walls were bleeding it out. You can move, you can drink, you can bury your past beneath layers of denial, but the truth will always find a way back. Guilt is its own haunting, and the deeper you hide it, the louder it screams. Long before I could remember birthdays, holidays, or even my first day of school, there was a single memory that carved itself into me like it was waiting for the years to come. I was 5, maybe a little younger. I woke up in that pale hour before dawn, when the world feels wrong and too quiet. I remember rolling over in bed and seeing him. A man at my window. Bald head. Skin pale under the moonlight. And those eyes, sharp, unnatural blue. They glowed like glass reflecting headlights, though there were none outside. His face was pressed against the glass, fog spreading from his breath. I screamed. I don't remember climbing out of bed or running. I just remember my mother's arms around me. She pulled me close, whispering it was only a dream, a nightmare, nothing to be scared of. She tucked me back in, closed the curtains tight, kissed my forehead. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the image didn't fade. For years after, I slept with my curtains pulled shut, even on the hottest summer nights. My twin brother, Caleb, used to tease me for it. Afraid of the boogeyman? He'd laugh, letting his own window stay open so the crickets sang him to sleep. My sister Rachel rolled her eyes whenever I brought it up. I learned not to. My dad didn't like weakness. He was strict in that way. No crying over scraped knees, no whining when it thundered. To him, fear was a thing you wrestled down until it went quiet. So I buried that night. I labeled it a nightmare and pretended it never really happened. But there's a difference between forgetting and forcing yourself not to think. Every time the house creaked, every time the trees tapped the siding, every time headlights swept across my wall, I felt those eyes, watching, waiting. We grew up in a small neighborhood just outside Baltimore. The kind of street where people left their doors unlocked, where kids played stickball in the road and nobody worried. My father's job with the Postal Service kept us steady. My mom was the softer balance, always reminding us that life wasn't just rules and discipline. Still, I never told either of them how that face followed me into my dreams for years. When I hit middle school, I convinced myself I was past it. People outgrow their childhood fears. That's what I told myself anyway. I buried it deep. Until much later, when it came back sharper than ever, and I learned the worst part. It hadn't been a dream at all. I was 23 when the memory clawed its way back to the surface. My father had fallen ill. Lung cancer. By the time we got him into a hospital in Bogota, Colombia, where he had retired with my mother after selling the house, he was already a shadow of himself. We sat in that sterile waiting room with its humming fluorescent lights and white walls that smelled of bleach and sickness. Rachel was 28 then, Caleb 23 like me. We hadn't been in the same room in years. We tried small talk to fill the silence. Work, relationships, anything but the fact that our father was dying down the hall. At one point, I don't know why, I mentioned the nightmare. Maybe because being back together stirred old memories. Maybe because the smell of antiseptic made me feel 5 again. Remember when I swore there was a guy at my window? I said, half laughing. Scared the hell out of me. Caleb chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, you were such a scaredy cat. Curtains closed, lights on, stuffed animals lined up like soldiers. I expected Rachel to smirk the way she always had. Instead, her expression froze. Her smile vanished. She stared at me, then at the floor. That wasn't a dream, she said quietly. The air went heavy. I blinked at her, not sure I'd heard right. What do you mean? I asked. She swallowed, glanced around like she wasn't sure if she should keep going. Then she told us. She had been 9 or 10 then. She heard the scraping at her own window first. When she looked up, there he was, a bald man with those same awful eyes. He was prying at the frame, trying to force it open. She screamed and our dad came running. He threw open her door, saw the man, and charged outside. Rachel said she remembered hearing shouting, the sound of feet pounding the grass, and then silence. When the police arrived, the man was gone, swallowed by the woods behind our yard. Hours later, after the adrenaline cooled, Dad checked every window. That's when he saw the marks on mine. The scratches where someone had tried the lock. The only thing that saved me was the latch holding firm. My stomach knotted. All my life I'd convinced myself it was just a nightmare. But it wasn't. The face at the glass was real. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I whispered. Rachel's eyes softened. "You were 5. Dad didn't want you living in fear. He told us never to bring it up again." I leaned back in my chair, dizzy. Caleb stared at her like she'd just confessed to murder. None of us spoke for a while after that. The beeping of machines down the hall filled the silence. My skin felt too tight, like I was 5 again, waiting for those eyes to blink. Our father never mentioned it again before he passed. I'll never know if he chased that man far, or if the man just walked calmly into the woods knowing he'd be back one day. After the funeral, I couldn't shake the feeling. I flew back home, tried to return to work, tried to act normal, but something in me was rattled loose. I found myself avoiding windows again, pulling curtains shut even in the middle of the day. I told myself it was old paranoia returning, nothing more. But then the dreams started. The first one came a week after I returned. I woke in my apartment drenched in sweat. In the dream, I had been back in my childhood room. I could hear the scraping at the window, slow and deliberate. When I turned my head, he was there. Same bald head, same piercing eyes. Only this time he wasn't outside. He was standing in my room. His shadow fell across my bed. I tried to scream, but no sound came. He leaned closer, so close I could feel his breath on my cheek. When I woke, my throat was raw from yelling. My neighbor banged on the wall telling me to shut up. It didn't stop. Night after night, the same dream. The man always closer, always silent, always waiting. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Caleb thought I was overdramatic when we were kids. Rachel had her own family to care about. I carried it alone, just like before. One night, though, it got worse. I jolted awake around 3 a.m., heart racing. My apartment was silent, but when I looked toward the window, I swore I saw the faintest outline of a figure retreating from the glass. I stumbled to the curtains, yanked them open. Nothing. Empty street, shadows of trees swaying under the streetlight. The next morning I found faint scratches on the outside of the frame. I told myself it had to be the wind, a branch, anything but him. But deep down, I knew. Paranoia became my shadow. I changed apartments, installed cameras, slept with a baseball bat within reach. Still the dreams came. Still the memories grew sharper, like my mind was refusing to let me soften them anymore. One evening, Caleb called. "You've been weird lately," he said. "You okay?" I hesitated. Then I told him everything. The dreams, the scratches, the feeling that the man was still out there. Caleb sighed. "You're scaring yourself, man. Dad chased that guy off decades ago. He's probably long dead." "Then why do I still see him?" I snapped. "Why do I wake up feeling like he's breathing down my neck?" Silence on the line. Then Caleb said quietly, "Because you never dealt with it. You buried it. Now it's eating you alive." Maybe he was right. Or maybe he wanted to believe it was all in my head. A month later, Rachel called me out of the blue. "I've been thinking about that night," she admitted. "I can't get his face out of my mind either. Do you think he ever came back?" Her voice shook. That scared me more than anything. If Rachel, the one who always rolled her eyes, admitted she was afraid, then maybe it wasn't just me. I didn't answer her question. Some things don't have answers. The last time I saw him, or thought I did, was 3 months ago. I was in a cheap motel outside Richmond, traveling for work. The walls were thin, the air smelled of mold. I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I turned over, and there he was. Not outside, not in a dream. Standing in the corner of the room, bald, blue-eyed, silent. I blinked, and he was gone. Just shadows. But when I turned on the light, I saw something scratched into the cheap wooden dresser. 4 words. I never left you. I checked out before sunrise, drove home shaking, and sat in my car until daylight. Since then, I haven't seen him, but I feel him. Every creak of my apartment floor. Every shadow at the edge of my vision. I don't know if he was ever just a man. Maybe he was. Maybe he's long gone, and it's my mind replaying a wound that never healed. Or maybe he's still out there, watching, waiting, like he always has. I lock my windows every night. Curtains drawn tight, just like when I was 5. And I wonder if someday I'll wake to find those blue eyes again, not in memory, not in dreams, but standing over me. Trauma left unspoken never truly disappears. Silence doesn't erase fear, it only gives it room to grow. Facing what haunts us, whether real or in memory, is the only way to stop it from following us forever. I used to think of myself as reliable. That was the word people at the office used when they talked about me. Hector, the reliable one. I stayed late. I kept my head down. I double-checked other people's reports when they missed something. I laughed at their dumb jokes even when they weren't funny. For 10 years, I built my reputation on being dependable. And then one afternoon, in the middle of a quarterly meeting, I hurled a chair across the room. I still don't know what set me off. Someone corrected a number on my slide, and my hands started shaking. My throat burned, and before I knew it, I was screaming. Spit flew from my mouth. I told him he didn't know a damn thing, that none of them did. The chair clattered off the whiteboard and dropped with a bang that silenced the whole floor. They sent me home that day. HR called the next morning. 2 options: resign quietly or agree to therapy, with written proof that I was attending. I wanted to tell them to shove it, but I didn't have savings to fall back on. So I nodded into the phone, agreed to therapy, and told myself I'd treat it like another work assignment. That's how I ended up in Dr. Lyle's office, sweating through my shirt, sitting in a soft armchair that felt like it might swallow me. The place smelled faintly of cinnamon, like a candle had been burning earlier. The blinds were half closed, and a clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. "Why don't you tell me what you've been seeing?" he asked, pen scratching against his pad. "They're not real," I said quickly. "Just stress visions. I know what's happening to me. I've been under pressure, that's all." "What kind of visions?" I stared at my shoes. The laces were frayed. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I had to. People without faces. Long hallways that never end. And this woman... I cleared my throat. Her hands are covered in blood. She whispers my name. Dr. Lyle didn't blink. He leaned forward slightly. "What does she say?" The words stuck in my throat. Finally, I whispered. "She says, 'You promised you'd never forget.'" He nodded, jotting it down. "I'd like you to start keeping a journal. Write everything down, the dreams, the visions, the feelings. Don't censor yourself. Can you do that?" I agreed, even though I felt ridiculous. Writing nightmares in a notebook wasn't going to change anything. But I was desperate to keep my job, so I left with a spiral pad tucked under my arm and the sour taste of shame in my mouth. That night, I dreamed of her again, the woman with the blood-soaked hands. She stood at the foot of my bed, whispering the same words. When I woke up, my sheets were damp with sweat, and the clock read 3:17 a.m. I sat at the kitchen table under the yellow light, opened the notebook, and wrote everything down, every detail I could remember. My handwriting shook across the page. It was only the beginning. The journal filled faster than I expected. Every night I woke at strange hours, and every night she was there. sometimes standing in the corner, sometimes inches from my face, always whispering, always with her dripping hands. I tried to convince myself it was all stress, but the entries piled up, page after page of the same figure, the same message. At our next session, Dr. Lyle read my notes carefully, nodding as though everything made perfect sense. "You're processing," he said. "That's good, but I want you to take it a step further." "What do you mean?" "Draw them." I barked out a laugh. "I'm not an artist." "Doesn't matter. Sometimes images speak clearer than words. Draw what you see." So I did. At first the sketches were crude, stick figures with smudges where their faces should be, scribbles for hallways. But the more I tried, the sharper they became. My hand moved with a confidence I didn't recognize. The faceless people turned eerily lifelike, as though I had seen them standing right in front of me. And the woman. God, the woman. Her eyes bulged with fury, her hair matted across her cheeks, her mouth frozen in a scream that never ended. The worst part was the blood on her hands. I could see the glisten of it, even though the drawing was nothing but pencil and paper. I started hearing noises in my apartment. Pages rustling when the windows were shut. Footsteps in the kitchen at night. Once I woke to the sound of whispering, and when I sat up, the sketches I'd left on the coffee table fluttered, as though someone had just touched them. I tried telling myself it was exhaustion, but the fear grew sharp and constant. I began to dread the sessions, yet I also needed them. I wanted answers. One night I walked into my living room and froze. Dr. Lyle was standing there. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't called. He was just there, flipping through my drawings with an expression I couldn't read. "What the hell are you doing here?" I shouted. He looked up slowly. His voice was calm. Too calm. "These aren't hallucinations, Hector." My skin prickled. "What are you talking about?" "These are memories," he said. "You didn't imagine them. You buried them." I laughed, but it came out cracked and desperate. "That's insane." He closed the notebook with a snap. "You killed her. Your girlfriend. The woman with the bloody hands. You beat her in a jealous rage, and then you forced yourself to forget." The room tilted around me. My chest tightened. "That's not true," I whispered. "I loved her." But then, from the corner of the room, a whisper slid against my ear. "You promised you'd never forget." I turned and she was there. I hit the floor hard, knees cracking against the wood. She was standing only a few feet away, dripping hands leaving dark streaks down her thighs. My heart hammered against my ribs. "This isn't real," I muttered. "You're not real." But she stepped closer. Her eyes glistened, and when she opened her mouth, a rush of air brushed against my face. "Remember?" I clutched my head, squeezing my temples until spots danced in my vision. "No, it's not possible." Dr. Lyle didn't move. He just stood there, arms folded, watching me unravel. His voice was low but steady. "Tell me what you see, Hector." I screamed at him, begged him to make her go away, but he only repeated the question. Finally, words spilled from me, broken and frantic. She was screaming at me. She accused me of cheating. She wouldn't stop. I pushed her, but I didn't. My voice cracked. Memories flooded like broken glass, cutting their way through. The night in the apartment, her voice raised, my fists clenching, the sound of her head striking the edge of the coffee table. I stumbled backward, shaking my head violently. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to." Her bloody hands reached toward me. The smell of iron filled my nose. I gagged. "You didn't call for help," Dr. Lyle said flatly. "You wrapped her in a blanket. You put her in the trunk of your car. You drove her out past the quarry." "How do you know that?" I screamed. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather badge wallet. The glint of metal caught my eye. A detective's badge. "Because we've been investigating you for a long time. The therapy wasn't treatment, Hector. It was interrogation." My body went cold. The drawings on the table blurred, faces swirling into pools of blood. My head pounded. I couldn't breathe. The weeks that followed were a blur of interviews and locked rooms. I barely remember the ride downtown. They said I confessed half a dozen times. Sometimes I swore it was an accident. Other times I insisted it never happened at all. They showed me photographs of the quarry. A mound of dirt disturbed. Fragments of cloth that matched the blanket I remembered. My signature on credit card statements from the gas station I'd stopped at that night. The hardest part was the journal. Every entry I thought was describing visions, dreams, hallucinations. It all read like a confession now. Page after page of faceless people, endless hallways, a woman with bloodied hands. A prosecutor could wave it in front of a jury and not even need to say a word. The detectives asked me about the whispers, the hallucinations, and I didn't know how to answer. Were they memories? Guilt? Ghosts? Even sitting in that gray room under fluorescent lights, I could still hear her voice sometimes, brushing against my ear. You promised you'd never forget. I thought jail would silence it, but it didn't. Nights were the worst. The concrete walls around my cot stretched into long hallways when I blinked. My cellmate asked me once why I muttered in my sleep. I told him I was talking to myself, but really I was bargaining with her shadow. Dr. Lyle, or Detective Lyle I should say, visited only once after the arrest. He didn't sit across from me with his notebook. He stood on the other side of the glass with his arms folded, expression unreadable. You wanted the truth, he said through the phone. Now you have it. I couldn't answer. My throat closed. All I could do was hang up the phone and press my forehead against the glass, waiting for her whisper to fade. It never did. The trial lasted months. They paraded the evidence, journals, sketches, testimony from neighbors who heard fights through the walls. They painted me as a jealous, violent man who snapped. Maybe they were right. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. Second-degree murder. I sit here now in a cell that smells of disinfectant and sweat. The walls are blank, but I can still see the claw marks of my own memory etched across them. The other inmates ignore me mostly. They don't know that when I close my eyes, I see her standing at the foot of my bed, blood dripping, whispering those words. Sometimes I wonder if she's a ghost, or just the part of me that still remembers what I tried to bury. It doesn't matter anymore. She won't let me forget, and maybe that's the punishment I deserve more than bars or chains. I started writing again. Not drawings this time, just words. Honest ones. The pages don't make sense half the time, but I write anyway. Maybe it's the only way to stay sane. Maybe it's the only way to face what I did. When the lights go out at night and the hallways stretch in my mind, I hear her whisper. And now, for the first time, I answer her. I say, I remember. The story of Hector Bell shows how denial can be more dangerous than guilt itself. The mind will bury memories too painful to face, but the truth has a way of clawing back. Pretending the past never happened doesn't erase it. It only gives it more power. Facing our actions, no matter how dark, is the only path to freedom. Otherwise, the ghosts we try to silence will whisper forever. I first saw him online. Not on a dating app, but through a mutual friend's comment thread that spiraled into private messages. His profile looked like something out of a travel magazine. Photos in Portugal, stone alleys, waves crashing against cliffs, Wilton leaning against a faded blue door with the ease of someone who belonged there. His captions were thoughtful, like journal entries written for strangers. He quoted poets in English, Portuguese, and Spanish. He wrote about family, about resilience, about how women shaped him since he was the youngest of 3 sisters. He reached out casually at first, complimenting a post I'd made about work. Your words carry warmth, he wrote. A little pretentious maybe, but in the haze of late nights and loneliness I answered. The messages became longer, flowing into paragraphs about philosophy, about travel, about fate. His English was nearly flawless, just touched with an accent that came alive in voice notes. I listened to them in bed, eyes closed, smiling at the way he said my name. His voice was like velvet dipped in sincerity. I told myself to be careful. I wasn't naive, but he seemed different. He didn't push for anything physical right away. He asked about my childhood, my favorite books, the things I was most ashamed of. And when I told him, he never judged. He responded with stories of his own. Parents who fought, a father who sometimes disappeared, sisters who taught him empathy. We met for dinner after a month of talking. He chose the place, a quiet little Italian restaurant tucked between warehouses, a spot I'd never noticed before. When I arrived, he was already there wearing a pressed shirt that looked expensive. He stood, kissed my cheek, pulled out my chair. The night passed in a blur of red wine and pasta I can't remember tasting. He listened to me like I was the only person in the world. When I joked about my clumsiness, he told me I was graceful. When I spoke about my job frustrations, he said I was strong. By the time the bill came, I was floating. He paid in cash, leaving a tip large enough that the waiter returned twice to thank him. Walking to my car, he slipped a small wrapped box into my hand. Inside was a silver charm shaped like a book. "Because you're always telling stories," he said, smiling like he already belonged in mine. That was how it began. The first weeks felt like a romance novel. He left handwritten notes in my mailbox, even though he lived across town. He sent morning messages before I woke, as if he had memorized my routine. He surprised me with flowers after a stressful workday, claimed he just felt that I needed them. When I was ambitious, full of energy, he was my cheerleader, telling me I could conquer anything. When I was low, he was gentle, saying he would carry my burdens until I was ready to lift them again. It felt uncanny, the way he mirrored me so perfectly. But small cracks showed. When I asked what he did for work, he grew vague. "Remote management," he said, waving his hand as if the details were too boring to bother with. Sometimes he said he worked with finance. Other times, technology. His stories shifted. Once he told me his father had passed away when he was young, shaping him into the man he was. Weeks later, he mentioned an argument with his father over the phone. When I raised an eyebrow, he chuckled softly. Memory lapse. English isn't my first language, remember? He always had an excuse. He claimed he didn't drink, said alcohol clouded judgment, but then posted photos from a vineyard tour in Spain, glass raised high. When I teased him, he laughed it off. "Special occasion, I forgot I told you." He was so charming in his apologies that questioning him felt cruel, like I was the one breaking the spell. Then one evening I scrolled through his old photos and saw a woman tagged in several of them. He had once called her a family friend. Something inside me pushed to reach out. I sent her a polite message, half expecting she wouldn't respond. She answered within minutes. Her first line punched me in the chest. "That's not his story. That's mine." Her name was Anna. She had been married to him for years. Married. Not dating, not a fling. Married. They'd lived together in Australia until he abandoned her, leaving debts and half-packed boxes behind. She told me he never worked. He drained her savings, convincing her it was temporary, that he was on the brink of starting something big. He manipulated her with love notes, flowers, big speeches about destiny. The same gestures I thought were mine alone, and Anna wasn't the only one. 2 other young women had contacted her after he left. Each told the same story. Wilton promised them the world, moved into their lives, convinced them to fund his lifestyle, leaned on their ambition while offering nothing but words. Then he disappeared when the lies caught up. I read her messages over and over, nausea rising. My silver charm, the dinners, the flowers, all probably paid for by someone else's desperation. I wasn't special. I was part of a rotation. When I confronted him, I expected denial. I expected anger. Instead, he smiled calmly, almost indulgently. "People only believe the story they want to hear," he said, sipping his coffee. "Which one did you believe?" Something inside me cracked then. It wasn't just lies. It was sport. He thrived on watching us unravel, on proving he could bend reality as long as we wanted to be loved. I left without finishing my drink. Blocking him didn't stop him. He appeared outside my office one afternoon, leaning casually against the brick wall holding a gift bag. My stomach dropped as soon as I saw him. He didn't move toward me. He just watched, smiling, as though waiting for me to come to him. I ducked inside and didn't leave until a coworker offered to walk me out hours later. Emails started arriving from names I didn't recognize. Friends who swore Wilton was misunderstood, who begged me to give him another chance. The writing style was identical to his messages. One night I found a bouquet of flowers at my door. No note, but the brand was the same he always bought. I thought about filing a report, but what could I say? A man I dated sent me flowers? Finally, I agreed to meet him in a public cafe, desperate to end it. He looked radiant as ever, his smile perfectly rehearsed. He leaned across the table and whispered promises. Trips to Europe, a wedding, a family. He said the women were bitter, unable to handle his honesty. He said I was different. He always said I was different. But when I mentioned Anna by name, his jaw tightened. His hand twitched. His eyes, once warm, hardened like glass. "She's dramatic," he said, voice dropping low. "She always ruins things." For the first time, I believed every word Anna had told me. I walked away that night. I blocked him again, changed my locks, stopped posting publicly online. Slowly, he faded into the background, though sometimes I still see echoes. A new friend request from a stranger with familiar blue eyes. A message in broken English that feels too rehearsed. Even now, months later, I sometimes wonder how many more women are tangled in his web. How many are listening to his voice notes in bed, smiling at his promises, believing they're the one who finally matters. The truth is, Wilton doesn't love anyone. He loves the performance, the chase, the unraveling. And when he smiles, it isn't affection, it's victory. Wilton's story is a reminder that charm without consistency is just manipulation in disguise. Real love doesn't need rehearsed lines or shifting stories. It shows itself through honesty and stability. When someone's words feel too perfect but their actions don't match, pay attention. Believing only the story we want to hear leaves us vulnerable to those who thrive on deception. My name is Rachel, and if I had to explain myself in one word, it would be protective. Some people might call it controlling, or paranoid, or overbearing. But when you raise a child alone, especially after a pregnancy that nearly tore you apart, you learn there's no such thing as too careful. My son, Jamie, is 6. He's my entire world. The only reason I get out of bed in the morning, and the only thing that keeps me going when I'm too exhausted to keep my eyes open. His father walked out when I was pregnant. There's a whole backstory to that mess, but all you need to know is he didn't want responsibility, and I didn't want my child growing up watching a man resent him. So it's been just the two of us in this small suburb. We have a little rental house with peeling paint and creaky floors. It isn't perfect, but it's ours. I work part-time at the library and pick up bookkeeping jobs from home. Nothing glamorous, but it covers food, rent, and clothes that Jamie will outgrow in 3 months flat. Most days I feel stretched so thin I might snap, but when Jamie laughs, all the cracks in me feel worth it. I thought the hardest part of motherhood was the exhaustion. Sleepless nights, the tantrums, the school drop-offs with a kid clinging to your leg while other parents stared. But the truth is, the hardest part is the constant low hum of fear. Fear that something could happen, that he could get sick or hurt or taken. And I can't lie, I've always been a little high-strung about safety. I lock every door, check every window twice before bed. I memorize the license plates of strange cars parked on the block. It sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but tell me which mother hasn't imagined the worst and then built her life around preventing it. The first time I saw him, the man I came to call the Shadow Man, was at the playground. It was a Saturday morning, bright and warm, the kind of day when every kid in the neighborhood swarms the swings and slides. Jamie was shrieking with laughter on the swings, his skinny legs pumping like he was determined to launch himself to the sky. I sat on a bench nearby, scrolling half distracted through my phone but keeping him in the corner of my eye. That's when I noticed him. He was standing near the tree line, just past the play area. Tall, gaunt, hoodie pulled up over his head even though it wasn't cold. At first I thought he was another parent, maybe someone walking their dog, though I didn't see a leash. But every time I looked up, he slipped back, like he didn't want to be caught watching. I told myself not to overreact. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was just a teenager killing time. But when Jamie ran over to me, hair sticking to his sweaty forehead, I pulled him onto my lap and hugged him tighter than usual. That night, Jamie woke screaming. I sprinted into his room, heart in my throat. He was sitting upright in bed, tears streaking his cheeks. "The shadow man is in my room," he sobbed, pointing toward the corner. I flipped on the light. The room was empty. The only thing out of place was the window. It was open, even though I'd sworn I shut it earlier. I soothed him the best I could, whispering, "It was just a dream, baby. You're safe." But inside, my stomach was ice, because the look in his eyes wasn't the foggy panic of a nightmare. It was the raw terror of a child who had seen something real. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. During the day, I told myself I was imagining things. But when Jamie clung to me at bedtime, begging me to keep the lights on, I couldn't dismiss it. At the grocery store, I thought I saw the same man in the parking lot. Hoodie pulled up, standing by a cart corral, staring. By the time I turned my head again, he was gone. At Jamie's school, I lingered by the gate at pickup, scanning every face in the crowd of parents. My heart jumped at shadows. "Rachel, you're wound too tight," one of the other moms told me when I confessed I felt uneasy. She laughed it off, said motherhood made everyone paranoid. Maybe she was right. But that didn't explain Jamie waking up night after night, sobbing that the shadow man was back. Finally, I bought cameras. 4 little black domes, 1 for the living room, 1 in the hallway, and 2 outside the house. I told myself it was just precaution. If someone was creeping around, I'd have proof. The first week, nothing. Just grainy footage of me microwaving leftovers or Jamie sprawled on the couch with cartoons. But one night, unable to sleep, I pulled up the feed on my phone. At first it looked normal. Then I noticed movement. A figure, sitting on the couch, while I was asleep upstairs. My blood turned cold. I scrubbed back through the recording. There it was again. A figure standing in Jamie's room, brushing a hand over his hair. I bolted down the hall, flung open his door. He was asleep, chest rising and falling peacefully. The room was empty. The next morning I took the footage to the police. The officer barely looked at it before giving me a practiced smile. "Stress, ma'am. Being a single mom is hard. Your mind can play tricks. Looks like static to me." I wanted to scream. Static? It was clear as day. A person, but I left with nothing but a pamphlet about coping with anxiety. By then I was convinced the shadow man wasn't just in Jamie's nightmares. He was here, in our lives, waiting for a moment when I slipped. And I swore I wouldn't let that happen. It happened on a Thursday evening. I was making pasta in the kitchen, humming to myself to drown out the quiet. Jamie was in his room, coloring. I left him alone for less than 10 minutes. When I went to check, the room was empty. My heart seized. I tore through the house, calling his name, voice breaking. No answer. I ran into the yard, shouting until neighbors stepped outside. "Have you seen Jamie?" My legs barely carried me as I searched the block, panic clawing at my throat. Then I saw it. A faint light flickering in the woods behind the neighborhood. Not a street light. Too dim, too uneven. Like a lantern. I didn't think, I just ran. Branches tore at my arms, the ground uneven beneath my feet. My lungs burned, but I kept going until the trees parted and a small cabin appeared. Light seeped through the cracks in the boarded windows. I grabbed a rusted crowbar leaning against the wall outside. My hands shook. but rage and fear carried me through the door. "If you touch him, I'll kill you," I screamed. The cabin was silent, empty, except for Jamie. He was curled in a corner, arms wrapped tight around himself, sobbing. Relief hit so hard I nearly collapsed. "Jamie!" I dropped the crowbar and rushed to him, pulling him close. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here." But he recoiled, shrinking away from me. His eyes were wide, terrified. "Please," he whispered. "Don't hurt me again, Mommy." The words froze me where I stood. I don't remember much after that. My body moved, but my mind cracked wide open. I tried to tell myself he was confused, scared, maybe still half dreaming. But deep down I knew. The cameras hadn't lied. The man I thought I saw in the footage, the shadow man brushing Jamie's hair, standing over him while he slept, it wasn't a stranger. It was me. Dissociation, they call it. When your mind fractures. When you split yourself into pieces so you can keep living with yourself. My brain had turned me into two people. Rachel the protector, and Rachel the monster. I remembered flashes. Holding Jamie too tightly when he cried, shaking him until his teeth rattled, whispering things I didn't mean. His screams in the night weren't nightmares, they were memories. Every time I saw the shadow man at the playground, the grocery store, the parking lot, it was my own reflection. Warped glass, half-glimpsed windows, the truth I refused to face. And Jamie knew. The look in his eyes that night in the cabin will haunt me forever. He wasn't just scared of some faceless man, he was scared of me. They say memory is unreliable, that trauma twists what we see, but I can't deny it anymore. The shadow man was never real. He was the part of me I didn't want to see, the part I locked away until it clawed back out. I wanted so badly to be the perfect mother, the protector, the safe place. But exhaustion, loneliness, and rage curdled into something else. Something I couldn't admit even to myself. I don't know what will happen now. Whether Jamie will ever forgive me. Whether I even deserve forgiveness. Sometimes I look in the mirror and catch my own reflection and flinch, half expecting to see the shadow man staring back. But there's no shadow man, just me. And maybe that's the scariest truth of all. The monsters we fear are not always lurking outside our doors. They can live inside us, hidden beneath denial and desperation. Protecting those we love means facing our own darkness before it consumes them. When I look back at that night, I can't decide if it started with the car breaking down or years earlier when everything inside me began to rot. But I'll start with the car, because that's easier to explain. I had been on the road for 12 straight hours, running on caffeine and nerves, when the engine finally coughed and gave up on Highway 41. The rain was relentless, slamming against the windshield like it had been waiting for me to fail. The wipers dragged across the glass with a useless squeak until I killed the ignition. My phone had no service. The map on the dash showed nothing but miles of black road cutting through farmland. I should have felt panic, but what I felt instead was resignation. Things had been falling apart for so long that a dead car felt like just another nail in the coffin. My marriage was over. My job gone after too many missed shifts and one too many drunken arguments with the boss. My father, the only person who ever gave me straight advice, was buried 6 months earlier. All I had left was a suitcase of clothes, an overdrawn checking account, and a restlessness that kept me from staying anywhere for more than a few weeks. Through the downpour, I saw the faint flicker of a neon sign. Sunset Motel. Vacancy. The kind of roadside place you only go to when you're out of options. The sign buzzed and sputtered, the orange glow barely cutting through the rain, but it was enough to get me moving. I walked the mile in soaked shoes, suitcase dragging behind me. The lobby reeked of stale coffee and bleach, like someone had tried to scrub away decades of smoke and mildew, but only managed to mix the smells into something worse. Behind the counter stood an older man with watery blue eyes and a smile that didn't reach them. His name tag said Earl. "Car trouble?" he asked, voice flat but polite. "Yeah," Broke down back there, I said, running a hand over my face. He slid a brass key across the counter. Room 6. But listen, son, don't go outside after dark. Nothing good happens out there. I gave a short laugh. Right, thanks for the advice. The room wasn't much. Peeling wallpaper curling at the edges, a carpet that smelled faintly of mildew, a fridge humming like it was ready to die. But there was a bed, and I was too exhausted to care. I threw my wet clothes over a chair, collapsed onto the mattress, and drifted into a heavy sleep. It must have been after midnight when the shouting woke me. At first I thought it was thunder, but then I heard it clearly. A man's voice, sharp with anger, spilling through the thin walls, then a gunshot, then a child crying. My heart hammered. I pressed my ear to the wall. The sound was unmistakable. I grabbed the phone and dialed the front desk. Earl answered immediately. "There's a fight in room 7, I shouted. "Someone fired a gun. I heard it." Silence. Then Earl's voice, calm and steady. "Sir, you're the only guest tonight." The line clicked dead. I sat frozen, the receiver still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone buzz in my skull. My skin prickled, every nerve awake. I paced the room, whispering to myself that it had to be a dream, a nightmare, the kind where you wake in a sweat and laugh about it later. But then the crying came again, louder this time. A child's sobs rising and falling through the wall like they were in the room with me. I snapped. I stormed into the hallway, bare feet slapping against the damp carpet, and kicked open the door to room 7. The smell hit first. Burnt gunpowder, faint but undeniable. The room itself was gutted. Bare floorboards, rotting wallpaper, dust thick enough to choke. No bed, no furniture, no signs of anyone living there. "Hello?" I shouted, voice cracking. "Is anybody here?" My words echoed back at me, hollow. I stumbled backward into the hallway, shaking. The crying had stopped. Only the rain outside and the hum of the lights remained. Back in my room, I collapsed into the chair, dragging my wet clothes onto my lap like a shield. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Minutes later, blue and red lights cut through the curtains. Sirens wailed. I rushed to the window. Police cruisers screeched into the parking lot. Boots thundered down the hall. A pounding on my door. "Police! Open up." Confused, I obeyed. Officers flooded in, guns drawn, shoving me to the floor. Cold metal cuffs snapped around my wrists. "What the hell is this?" "I didn't do anything," I shouted, panic strangling my voice. A detective crouched beside me, face stern, eyes sharp. "Jack Dwyer, you're under arrest for the murder of your wife and 2 children." The words didn't make sense. They slammed into me like a punch to the chest. "What? That's insane. I don't even have kids." But as the words left my mouth, flashes cut through my mind. My wife's face, tear-streaked. 2 children screaming. The deafening crack of a gunshot in a motel room just like this one. I thrashed against the cuffs. "No, you've got the wrong guy." The detective's expression didn't change. He spoke like he was reciting a fact. "You killed them, Jack. Here, in this motel." I shook my head violently. "No, I didn't. I don't even—" But the images came sharper now, piercing through the fog I'd built in my brain. My wife's voice begging. My own hand gripping the gun. The smell of smoke. "No," I whispered, rocking against the floor. "No, no, no." The wallpaper around me began to ripple. The peeling edges dissolved into white padded walls. The brass key I had shoved into my pocket shifted into a plastic wristband clamped around my arm. The humming fridge became the relentless buzz of fluorescent lights. I wasn't in a motel. I was in Ward 6 of the county psychiatric hospital, the officers pinning me down blurred into nurses in pale scrubs. Earl wasn't a motel manager. He was an orderly. The desk, the neon sign, the warning about going outside after dark, it was all my mind's way of making sense of where I was. Room 7 didn't exist. There was only the empty space in my head where I had tried to bury what I'd done. I screamed as they dragged me up, my bare feet sliding across the linoleum. But the sound of a child crying followed me down the hallway. The doctors tell me I've been here for weeks, that I was brought in after neighbors heard the gunshots, that when the police arrived I was sitting in the motel room with the bodies, staring at the gun in my hand. I don't remember it like that. My memory insists on highways and rain, on neon signs and peeling wallpaper, but every night when the lights dim and the hall's quiet, the other version breaks through. The crying, the shouting, the gunshot. Sometimes I try to argue with the doctors. I didn't have kids, I tell them. I didn't have a family. But then they slide photographs across the table. A smiling woman, 2 children with my eyes. I can't look at them for more than a second before nausea takes over. I ask where the photos came from, and they just say, "From your house, Jack." The truth presses against me like a weight. The motel wasn't a place I stumbled into after a car broke down. It was where I made my last stand against the life I had ruined. A roadside room where I ended it all. Now Ward 6 has become my world. Earl brings meals on a tray. The nurses check my vitals. The walls don't peel, but I swear sometimes I see stains spreading across them, dark and red, then gone when I blink. At night, I hear the crying. Always the crying. They say time dulls pain, but here it only sharpens it. Every day I replay what happened. Sometimes I convince myself it wasn't real, that my wife and kids are still out there somewhere, waiting for me to come home. Other times, the guilt crashes down so heavy I can't breathe. I pace the small room, fists pressed against my temples, whispering to myself. It was an accident. It wasn't me. But deep down, I know better. The mind can twist, can fracture, can invent neon signs and motel clerks to cover the truth. But memory doesn't die. It claws back through the cracks, dragging you into the reality you tried to bury. Every night I lie in the narrow hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. The crying comes soft at first, then louder until it fills the room. Sometimes I press my hands over my ears, but it doesn't help. The sound comes from inside me. I whisper apologies into the darkness, but the cries never stop. And I know they never will. You can run from the world, you can even run from yourself for a time, but the truth has no expiration date. Guilt doesn't vanish. It waits, festers, and bleeds back through the cracks of your mind. What you bury will always dig itself free, and when it does, it will demand to be heard. My name is Louisa Evans, and I've never been good at staying in one place for too long. Growing up in Indiana, I used to think I'd settle into a quiet life, maybe work at the local clinic like my mother did, marry young, raise kids who'd go to the same schools I went to. That kind of thing. But nothing turned out the way I imagined. Life never does. After my mother died, I left home, drifting between cities until I landed in this one. By then, I had a history I didn't want to talk about anymore. A relationship gone bad, some debts, things I tried to bury by moving far away. I found work at Ashwood Psychiatric Hospital, mostly by chance. A friend of a friend said they were desperate for night nurses. No one wanted the graveyard shift. The pay was steady, the benefits good enough. And maybe, I told myself, the quiet nights would give me space to think, to heal. The first time I walked through those long, sterile hallways, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and old metal. The walls were lined with pale green paint that always looked sickly under fluorescent light. The patients were mostly sedated by night, kept calm with medication. You'd hear the occasional groan or mutter from behind locked doors, but it wasn't loud. Mostly, it was still, almost too still. I liked it that way. But not room 19. Room 19 was down the East Hall, near the old wing that hardly anyone used anymore. The first time I passed it, I slowed, not sure why. My rounds were routine. Check vitals, record logs, make sure the doors were locked. But something about that door felt different. My hand hesitated over the clipboard as I peered through the observation window, and that's when I saw her. A woman strapped to the bed, wrists and ankles bound in thick leather restraints. Her face was pale, her eyes wide open, darting back and forth like a trapped animal. But it was her mouth that made me stop cold. Thick black stitches crisscrossed her lips, pulling the skin so tight it puckered. She made a muffled sound, like she was screaming behind the thread, but no words came out. I stepped back, my heart pounding. I asked one of the senior nurses about her later, careful to sound casual. "Who's in room 19? The nurse barely looked up from her paperwork. "That room's not your concern." That was all she said. After that, I started dreading that hallway. I told myself not to look, but every time I passed, I'd catch myself glancing in just for a second, and there she was, staring at me with those wild eyes. Sometimes she thrashed, the restraints creaking against the bed frame. Other times she just lay still, tears sliding down her face. I wondered who she was, how she ended up like that, and why no one seemed to acknowledge her existence. No chart, no name on the door, nothing. It was like she wasn't supposed to be there at all. But she was, and somehow, I knew she was watching me. The hospital at 3 a.m. always had a strange hum to it, like the walls themselves were alive. That night was no different until I reached the East Hall. I glanced through the glass of room 19 out of habit and froze. The bed was empty. The restraints dangled loose, swaying slightly, as if someone had just slipped free. "Shit," I whispered, fumbling for my radio. "Room 19. The patient's gone." There was a pause on the line. Then the supervisor's voice crackled back, slow and confused. "Evans, there is no room 19 patient. That room's been empty for years." My throat went dry. But when I rushed back, the bed was neatly made. The straps coiled perfectly on the mattress. Empty. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes boring into me. Over the next week, the sightings began. I saw her at the far end of the hallway, a pale figure standing in the dim light before vanishing as I blinked. Once, in the break room, I caught her reflection in the window, blood dripping down her chin where the stitches had torn loose. When I spun around, the room was empty. I tried to tell one of the other nurses. She gave me a look like I was crazy. "You're overtired, Evans. Get some sleep." Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just exhausted. But then came the night I checked the medicine cabinet. I bent down to grab supplies, looked up, and in the glass, she was standing directly behind me, close enough that I should have felt her breath. Her stitched mouth quivered, threads stained dark. I dropped the tray, glass shattering across the floor. By the time another nurse rushed in, the figure was gone. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I knew then this wasn't just exhaustion. Something was wrong and I had to prove it. So I pulled the security footage. What I found hollowed me out. It wasn't her on the tapes. It was me. Standing motionless in corners, leaning over patients as they slept, staring directly at the cameras with eyes so empty I didn't recognize myself. I couldn't breathe as I watched the footage over and over, hoping it would change. But it didn't. It was me in the hallways, me in the corners, me with that vacant stare. When I told myself I was seeing the stitched mouth woman, was it really just me? I barely slept for days. Coffee and adrenaline kept me moving, but my body felt like it was unraveling. During rounds, I'd catch glimpses of myself in reflective glass and jump, swearing the woman was there just behind me. Once I found a small surgical kit in my locker. Thread, needles, scissors stained faintly brown. I swore I hadn't put it there. The paranoia grew. Every shadow stretched too long, every sound echoed. I started snapping at coworkers. When one nurse asked if I was okay, I nearly screamed at her. I told myself I had to keep it together. I was a nurse, a professional. But the truth was leaking through cracks I couldn't patch. One night I sat in the staff lounge, staring at my hands. Black thread clung to my fingertips, thin fibers caught beneath my nails. I rubbed them raw, trying to make them clean. The stitched mouth woman appeared again, this time in the window across from me. She didn't move, just watched. Her lips stretched in a grotesque smile, stitches tearing, blood seeping down her chin. "Why me?" I whispered. My own voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. No answer came, just silence and her eyes boring into mine. That was when I knew I couldn't hide anymore. I needed help, or at least answers. The next morning I went to the supervisor's office, my body trembled with every step. I shut the door behind me and sat down across from him, gripping the arms of the chair until my knuckles ached. "There's something wrong with me," I whispered. "I keep seeing her, this woman and the cameras." My voice cracked. "It's me on them. I don't know what's happening." The supervisor frowned, tilting his head. "Louisa, there is no stitched mouth patient. There never was." "No." I slammed my hands on his desk. "I saw her. I feel her." He leaned forward, his tone softer, almost pitying. "Do you remember why you're here?" I blinked, confused. "I'm a nurse, I work here. I've been on staff for 3 years." He sighed, sliding a folder toward me. My hands shook as I opened it. Photographs spilled out. A surgical kit. A woman bound to a bed, her lips crudely sewn shut, her eyes wide with terror. My stomach lurched. "That's not..." My words tangled. "That's not me." His voice was calm, firm. "You were admitted 2 years ago, Louisa, after the incident. The stitched-mouth woman wasn't someone else, she was your victim." I shoved the photos away. "No, I help people, I'm a nurse." But in the glass of his office window, I saw myself. Not in uniform, not holding a clipboard, but in a hospital gown. My hair tangled, my skin pale, black thread still clinging to my fingertips. And behind me, the stitched-mouth woman smiled. The days after blurred together. I stopped trusting anything I saw, anything I felt. The uniform I thought I wore was just in my head. The keys I carried weren't real. The rounds I thought I made. Fabrications stitched together in a brain that didn't want to face the truth. They moved me to a private room. Sometimes I'd wake strapped to the bed, screaming until my throat gave out. Other times, I'd sit quietly, hands in my lap, staring at the wall while the memory of thread-cutting skin replayed in my mind like a film I couldn't shut off. The stitched-mouth woman never left. She stood in corners, reflected in glass, smiling that broken smile. Sometimes I felt her hand on my shoulder. Sometimes I heard her voice, muffled but clear enough to understand. "You can't undo it." The doctor said I was delusional, that I had built a new identity as a nurse to protect myself from guilt. They said it wasn't uncommon after severe trauma, that denial could weave an entire false life. But in the deepest part of me, I knew it wasn't just guilt. The woman was real. Her rage lived inside me, stitched into my skin, reminding me every day of what I had done. I'm not sure anymore where reality ends and my mind begins. Maybe I'll never know. Maybe that's the real punishment. All I know is this. When I close my eyes, I see her smile. And when I wake, I feel the thread between my fingers, waiting for me to remember again. Guilt cannot be buried under lies or denial. Left unspoken, it grows into something that stalks us, warps reality, and consumes who we are. Facing our past, even the darkest parts, is the only way to heal. To look away is to let the stitches tighten until we no longer know ourselves. People always say small towns have long memories, but I never found that to be true. Folks forget faster than you'd think. They remember gossip, sure, and they'll talk about who bought a new truck or whose kid got caught sneaking beer behind the football bleachers. But the deeper things, the ones that cut, those get buried quick. That's why I liked running a motel off Highway 17. People came and went. No one lingered. No one asked questions. And whatever they saw was forgotten. The second they merged back onto the highway. I inherited the place from my uncle, who inherited it from my grandfather. Highway 17. Motel wasn't much to look at. Faded yellow paint, a neon vacancy sign that buzzed whether it was lit or not, and a lobby that smelled faintly of burned coffee. But it paid the bills. I made sure to greet everyone the same way. A smile, a cup of coffee, and a discount I claimed was because they looked tired. Travelers liked that. Made them feel like they'd stumbled on some rare kindness out in the middle of nowhere. What they didn't realize was that kindness is the easiest mask to wear. The rooms were nothing special. Threadbare carpets, beds with creaky frames, TVs older than some of my guests, but I kept the records sharp. Every payment logged, every signature neat. If the police ever came around asking questions, I could hand them a binder that made me look like the most upright motel manager in Nebraska. And they did come around every now and then. Someone's sister didn't make it to Kansas City, or a trucker didn't check back in with dispatch. Cops would sweep through, poke their heads into the rooms, check the laundry, maybe run a black light in the bathroom if they felt ambitious. But they never found anything. Not the soundproofed rooms, not the journals, not the people who stopped screaming only after their voices broke. I didn't see myself as cruel. I wasn't like the killers you read about, the ones who take trophies or write letters to the newspapers. I didn't raise a fist or a knife. I only wanted to understand something no one else seemed to care about, the precise moment when hope drained out of a person. Not when they died, but when they realized no one was coming for them. It started years earlier. A drifter, middle-aged, came through in winter. He had no ID, no bags, no one to call. He looked at me with that blank, exhausted expression I'd seen 100 times. I knew, just by the way he stood at the counter, that if he disappeared, no one would notice. That night, when I slid the bolt on the first soundproofed room, I felt calm, like I was stepping into a role I'd been rehearsing for my whole life. The motel itself became my partner. The vents carried the echoes. The pipes moaned at night, covering faint cries. Guests complained sometimes, about sobbing, about scratching in the walls. I'd apologize, hand them free breakfast, and smile. Old building, I'd say. Pipes like to talk. They always accepted it. People want to believe they're safe. That was the beauty of it. The motel looked like every other cheap roadside stop in America, and I looked like every other tired manager. No one noticed the difference until it was too late. The night that really stuck with me began with a woman named Teresa. She came in driving a beat-up Honda with plates from Texas. It was late, past 11, and she looked worn down to the bone. Her hair was tangled, her hands trembling when she passed me her ID. I asked the usual questions. Where are you headed? How was the road? She told me she was driving to see her sister in Des Moines. I nodded, smiled, slid her a room key, and added, "Because you look tired, I'll give you a discount." She gave me a grateful smile, the kind people give when they believe they've found a pocket of kindness in a rough stretch of road. That smile was always my confirmation. Around midnight, I knocked on her door. "Everything all right in there?" She opened it, just a crack. Her face showed hesitation, but she didn't push back when I asked if I could step inside. A few minutes later, the bolt clicked behind us. I didn't strike her, didn't raise my voice. I led her down the back hallway, past the supply closet and into the room that looked like any other until the door shut and the deadbolt slid. Inside, concrete walls and a heavy steel door replaced the faded wallpaper and squeaky carpet. She didn't scream right away. Most didn't. They thought it was a mistake, a prank, something that could be talked through. By the third day, her voice was ragged. I wrote in my journal. Day 3. Subject calls for sister by name, still hopeful someone will arrive. By the 7th day, she'd stopped shouting and started bargaining. Promises, prayers, anything. Day 7. Subject pleads, offers money. Alternates between anger and sobbing. Still believes release possible. By the 12th day, her voice broke into a whisper. Prayers too soft to hear clearly. Day 12. Subject whispers. Hope nearly extinguished. Acceptance phase approaching. I never wrote about the end. That wasn't the part that mattered. What mattered was the change, the flicker of hope as it burned out. And every time I learned a little more about people, about how much they could take, about what broke first. Sometimes it was their voice, sometimes it was their faith. The world outside never stopped. Truckers came and went, families checked in for a night, backpackers left their dirty socks behind. I smiled, offered coffee, and listened. No one ever suspected that just a few doors away someone else was counting their last days. That's what I loved about it, the invisibility of it all. Evil doesn't need a mask or a monster's face. Sometimes it looks like a man with kind eyes and a motel ledger neat enough to impress the sheriff. The motel changed as I did. By the late 90s, the paint was peeling worse, and fewer families stopped by. The highway stretched on with newer, shinier places offering free breakfast buffets and cable TV. My place became a haunt for the desperate, the broke, the running, the forgotten. Exactly the kind of people who wouldn't be missed. I started noticing patterns. People traveling alone gave themselves away in little ways. They never took ice from the machine because there was no one to share a drink with. They parked crooked, like it didn't matter. They lingered too long in the lobby when I made small talk, grateful for any kind of connection. One man, name of Mark, left behind a duffel bag with nothing but 2 shirts and a bottle of pills. He was one of those quiet types who avoided eye contact. He lasted 8 days. His voice gave out on day 5. He spent the last 3 days rocking in silence. My journal entry ended with just one line. Subject resigned. No further resistance. Sometimes I thought about what would happen if the police pressed harder, if they tore down the drywall or checked the foundations, but they never did. They were content with binders of records and my tired smile. Once a deputy even thanked me for keeping such neat logs, said I made their job easier. I nearly laughed in his face. The town whispered, "Of course, small towns always do." People talked about disappearances, about folks who checked in but didn't check out. But talk was just that, talk. Without proof, no one cared enough to look deeper. And proof was the one thing I never left behind. Well, almost never. There was one guest, a younger man, maybe 22, backpacker type. He scratched words into the concrete wall before he stopped fighting. I noticed them when I cleaned the room. 4 words, ragged, nearly illegible. Someone will find this. I chiseled them out, painted over the spot, but those words burned into me more than any scream. Someone would find it eventually, and that thought both terrified and thrilled me. By the time the motel started falling apart for real, I was an old man. The neon sign buzzed louder than ever. Most of the rooms were barely rentable, and the highway brought fewer travelers each year. The county finally posted a notice. The place was condemned. I packed what I could, stacked my journals neatly in a drawer, and left the rooms sealed. I didn't feel fear. I felt completion. Like a man who'd finished a lifetime of study and was ready to close the book. Years passed before I heard what the inspectors found. I was living 2 towns over under a different name when it hit the local news. 3 rooms sealed tight. Rusted locks. Concrete scarred with claw marks. Journals filled with every detail of despair. The camera lingered on the guest book they pulled from my old desk. Page after page of names, signatures, and dates. People missing for years. And at the very end, my handwriting, still careful despite the tremor of age. Checkout complete. I suppose you're wondering why I'm telling you this. Maybe you think it's a confession, or maybe you think it's another one of my stories, the kind people dismiss as roadside legend. Truth is, it doesn't matter. By the time you hear this, the motel will already be dust, the walls leveled, the rooms emptied. But the lesson of it all, if you want to call it that, still matters. Evil doesn't come with warning signs. It doesn't wear a mask or announce itself with blood. It smiles at you across a counter, offers you coffee, and asks where you're headed. It hides in plain sight, in places you forget the moment you leave. That's the silence I studied all those years. Not just the silence of people who stopped screaming, but the silence of a world that doesn't want to see what's right in front of it. And now, as I sit in a small rented room far from Highway 17, I wonder if anyone will ever understand what I was really chasing. Not death, not cruelty, just the moment when hope flickered out. That moment, to me, was the truest sound of silence. The story of Kingston Cox is a reminder that evil often hides in plain sight, masked by kindness and routine. We expect danger to look monstrous, but the most frightening truths are ordinary people who quietly decide to harm others without cause. The lesson is that we must not ignore the small warnings, the strange feelings, or the stories people dismiss. Paying attention, really paying attention, can be the difference between safety and silence. When I signed the lease, I told the landlord I needed a fresh start. He nodded, shoved a set of keys into my palm, and didn't ask anything else. People in small towns never do. They size you up, decide you're either harmless or not worth the trouble, and let you disappear into the background. That's exactly what I wanted. The little house sat at the edge of town, paint peeling from its siding, porch steps sagging with rot. Inside, it smelled faintly of dust and old wood. To anyone else, it might have looked like a sad excuse for a home, but to me it was a refuge. I moved in with 2 suitcases and a box of photographs I couldn't bring myself to throw away. My wife's smile was pressed flat between glass and cardboard, my daughter's laugh frozen in glossy colors that felt more unreal every time I looked at them. Everyone thought I lost them to an accident. The official report said faulty wiring, a tragedy, unavoidable. People left flowers at the ruins, shook my hand at the funeral, told me how sorry they were. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew something was wrong. I remembered the smell of gasoline in the air that night. I remembered how fast the flames spread, how unnatural it looked, and I remembered my daughter's voice, high and sharp, shrieking my name as the house came down. I buried those suspicions under routine. Wake up, work at the hardware store, come home, eat something from a can, sleep. I thought if I just kept moving, the ghosts wouldn't catch me. But silence is heavier than people realize. It presses in at night. It crawls into your chest and reminds you of what you lost. Sometimes I swore I heard faint crackling like a campfire somewhere far away. Sometimes I woke coughing, the sharp sting of smoke in my nose, though the air in the house was still. Neighbors noticed. One old man across the street told others he'd seen me outside barefoot at 2 a.m, muttering to myself, holding something shiny in my hand. Maybe just insomnia, he said, but suspicion dripped from his voice. I ignored him. Until the morning I woke in my backyard, barefoot, clutching a book of matches, my clothes faintly smelling of gasoline. I scrubbed myself raw in the shower, water running cold over skin that stung with guilt. I stared at my reflection and wondered if I'd lost my mind. I told myself it was stress, nightmares bleeding into waking life, but deep down, I knew it was more. The only way to be sure was to see it with my own eyes. That night I set up cameras in the living room, the hallway, even outside by the shed. I sat on the couch with the remote in my hand until exhaustion pulled me under. The next morning, dread coiled in my stomach as I hit play. At 3:17 a.m., there I was. My body moved like it belonged to someone else, eyes blank, mouth whispering words I couldn't hear. I carried a gas can across the living room, splashing it onto the floorboards in wide arcs. I held a match, struck it, the flame glowing bright. My hand hovered over the puddle of gasoline. My lips moved faster, as though praying. Then, after a long pause, I blew the match out. I staggered away from the screen, bile rising in my throat. The ritual repeated again and again. Strike a match, whisper, hover, blow it out. I didn't remember any of it. By daylight, I forced myself to go through the motions, clock in at the hardware store, answer questions about paint and nails, smile at customers. But every time I looked at the shelves of gasoline cans, my chest tightened. That evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to the nearest doctor, hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. I'm sleepwalking, I told him, voice cracking. I'm doing things I don't remember. Dangerous things. He studied me, flipping through a thick folder, his brow furrowed. Then he closed it and looked me straight in the eye. "This isn't new, Robert," he said softly. "You've been here before." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "You came to us after the fire, do you remember?" The room tilted, my chest clenched. His words dug into me like knives. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "That's not true. The fire was an accident, faulty wiring." The doctor's expression didn't waver. "That's what you told yourself. But we've been working with you since then. You've had sessions, medication, monitoring. You signed yourself into our care." The edges of the room seemed to blur. My hands gripped the armrests of the chair so tightly my knuckles went white. Memories pushed up from the depths, jagged and sharp. I remembered sitting in a room like this before, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I remembered nurses with soft voices and locked doors that clicked shut behind me. Most of all, I remembered that night, the can in my hand, the smell of gasoline, sweet and sickening, my wife's voice breaking into a scream, my daughter crying, my own whisper, some promise, some prayer I couldn't quite piece together before I struck the match. I bent forward, gasping, but the air wouldn't fill my lungs. The doctor spoke calmly, like this was routine. "You're here now, Robert. You've always been here. The house you think you rented, the neighbors, even the cameras, it's all part of your treatment. It helps you externalize the urges, but you circle back to the fire. You always do." I covered my ears, shaking my head. No, I moved here. I saw the house, I signed the lease, But even as I said it, I could see the truth unraveling. The landlord's pen, the contract, the old man across the street, they blurred, twisted, shifted into orderlies, nurses, staff watching me with careful eyes. My stomach lurched. I wasn't rebuilding my life. I was replaying it. That night I lay in the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as the hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. I tried to tell myself the doctor was wrong, that grief had twisted my mind, that this was just another cruel dream. But when the shadows grew long, I heard the crackle again. Not from the vents, not from outside, but inside my skull. I smelled smoke. When I blinked, the walls of the room seemed to ripple, peeling into wood paneling, stained carpet, photographs on the dresser, my daughter's shoes by the door, my wife's sweater draped across a chair, home, and me in the middle of it, holding a gas can. I dropped it, scrambling backward, but my body and the vision moved on its own. Blank eyes, steady hands, whispering words like a prayer. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked. The vision me struck a match. Firelight danced across his face. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the room was white, sterile, humming with electricity. My fists clenched the blanket. My breath came in ragged gasps. The fire wasn't haunting me. It was living inside me, waiting for the night to crack open so it could breathe again. The staff tell me it's progress to remember. They say facing the truth is the only way forward. But they don't hear what I hear. They don't smell what I smell. Every night it comes back. The matches in my hand, the gasoline on my clothes, the voices of my wife and daughter crying out as the fire eats them alive. I try to tell myself I won't let it happen again. I pace the room. I press my hands together and whisper apologies, bargains, promises. I strike imaginary matches in the air and blow them out before they touch flame. I repeat the ritual until my throat is raw. But I know the truth. No matter how many times I blow out the match, sooner or later, I'll let it burn. I am not haunted by the fire. I am the fire. You cannot run from the truth you carry inside. Guilt is not a shadow that follows, it is a spark waiting to ignite.